Yeah.
Okay.
So on that road was one of the pictures I took was Javier's house. And then after that, different people lived in. Then the Hobans had a place. Then the second person my father sold land to was, I'm gonna tell you about that. Was a lady named Mrs. Linda. She was from Louisiana. She was real light. She was light, white, but she was a black woman. She married a white man just as white as she was. He had one leg. He'd been in the war, and so they lived there. Now to get this. That man Foster in Maryfield, speak about race relations. I heard later in life, old man Foster was sued Mrs. Linda one time because he did some work for her. Then after he did the work, he found out that she wasn't a white woman, she was a black woman. That's what he said. My stepfather said. So he was suing Mrs. Linda because she wasn't a white woman, but he did the work. And she paid him, but that's what I did hear, and I thought that was the strangest thing. Did you ever hear the story about the white lady in Richmond, Virginia sued the hospital because they put a black man's heart into her white husband?
No.
I said he must have woke up asking for pig feet and chitlins then. And when I heard that, I couldn't believe it. The man's got a heart. It's like a car. A black car ain't gonna run much better than a white car,
Right, right.
But anyway, when I heard that much later, like that old man Foster, his son or grandson, eventually had the construction business in Maryland.
D.A. Foster.
Yeah, D.A. Foster, right.
Yeah.
The truck is still around. I met some guys one day who worked for him in D.C., and we got to talk, and I told him where I was from and about Foster. He said, well, Foster and one other company are the only two allowed to dig in the road because of gas lines. Because everybody cannot dig, because if you have everybody digging, there might be gas explosions. So some hook of a crook. Foster is allowed to do digging between anywhere. It's got to be digging gas lines. If it's got to be dug, you don't want to hit a gas line. It does happen there and then. I think it was like last week somewhere. But Foster has the right way of digging in the ground.
So Foster's grandfather is the one that was suing this woman.
Right? I guess it was. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Foster's lived in Maryfield?
I don't know where they lived. They probably lived somewhere close by.
Okay.
I do remember that, but when I heard that suing a woman because she wasn't a white woman, because he found out later she wasn't, Mrs. Linda. Mrs. Linda and her husband eventually moved to California. They got to be dead by now. Yeah. But
So let's go back to race relations, and you told a great story about one of the Smith brothers that owned Lee Furniture Store in Maryfield.
Right.
It was Raymond and Alfred Smith, and
was one taller than the other? I never knew both of them.
Raymond was taller.
Okay, I couldn't remember. All I know is he brought the man over to my house and he talked to me, and I think he told me who his name was, and I think Mrs. Ransom was working up at the time, and that's how I knew who they were. Because my mother said I wanted a wardrobe, and she said, "Well, let's go where Mrs. Ransom is working," And we went up there, and I bought the cabinet, and I liked it, and I guess they delivered it. And then stayed in the house there for a long time. Then Mrs. Ramsey's sister happened to come by the house one day, and I gave it to her. I probably took it down to Lamar's mother's house. I think I probably did. Yeah.
But he came to your grandfather's house.
No, he came to my house, our house, Smith's
okay.
house, our house.
Because he wanted to find a place for his.
Mr. Gilliam, yeah. Because Mr. Gilliam had to move out of Reverend Terry's house, and they was ready to knock it down. And I said they didn't get out of there quick enough because the house was going down I think like the next day or so. And I guess what the Gilliams did, they bought that house that Irene her husband had, Irene Brent, And so Mr. Gilliam's daughter Annie bought I guess her and her father and family probably bought that house, which was next door to my mother's house. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
So that's the way that was. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so anyway, something else I was going to tell you. I told you about Mrs. Linda, old man Anderson. But I never heard nothing else too much about race-wise. I tell you that was an incident at a baseball game. It was all black Spain baseball. And my father had been married 3 times when he married my mother. So she was the 4th wife, and she was much younger than he. And so one day we was at a baseball game, and a white ice cream man was selling ice cream, and this guy named Mason Lee, he got nasty with the white ice cream man, and he and my father got into it. And my father said, I felt like taking my knife out and cutting that sucker, And my mother said, well, it wasn't worth it. But really, he got nasty, could chase the white ice cream man off. He said, it should be a black ice cream man out here. The ice cream man was the only white person there selling popsicles in the ice cream truck, you know. But that was only one incident that I remember.
So where was the baseball field?
The baseball field is right. You've been up 50 late. You see where it says paycheck on the building?
Yes.
Okay, that's where our house was. Right across from there was a baseball field. And it was rumored that Dr. Johnson owned it, but I don't really know who owned it really. But anyway, that's where the baseball field, and they play baseball right there on some Sundays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I interviewed Smitty the barber. Did you ever go to Smitty's barber shop?
I used to go there, but he was in such demand I had to quit. It got to the place where I had to wait an hour or 2 hours, and I just...
That's an iconic place, isn't it?
Yeah, Dr. Johnson, Harold Johnson maybe owned that building at one time, didn't he?
He did, yes.
Right, yeah.
And then Smitty bought it.
Right. It was rumored that Dr. Johnson owned that property where the baseball field, but I never could confirm it, you know. Yeah.
Did you ever go to Dr. Johnson?
I went there once. For some reason, I did not like Dr. Johnson. I must have been 4 years old. My grandmother's father was sick, and he walked into the room. I know I can see it today. I was sitting in a chair, a little boy about granddad died at 45. So it must have been in 45. Dr. Johnson walked through the room, and I got a bad vibe from him. And I didn't like him. Although he gave me a shot when we were young, he gave us shots, but for some reason I just had never no feelings for him. I went to him later in life, and I was there from 9 in the morning till 2 before he saw me, I think. And I said I never should have came there in the first place, really. Yeah. So I never did like him, and various people said they did not like him.
Yeah.
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 So any other memories or recollections you want to leave with us?
I'm trying to think of anything else. Well, when Mrs. I remember my mother would go around with her she went down when Ruby Marshall's house burned down. A child died in that fire, you know. My mother went down and, you know, since we was all close by and everything. And it was supposed to be, from what my mother had told me, that the White People's Council was going to build the Marshalls a house, but it never happened. I did hear that. My mother came back and told me that, you know, and that they were going to build a house down there, but it never did happen. I did hear that.
There was a lot of house fires then, wasn't there?
Well, okay, Curtis Terry, did you ever meet him? His house burned down. And there was a joke about that. Kids all said, Mama got stuck in the wind and she couldn't get out. You know, their house burned down. Then I think Hazel Moss had a house made burned down. Then my grandmother's house. And then Mrs. Lee's house. Then the Woodland house. Mr. Noakes had this is an incident. I remember it well. Mr. Noakes had a shed caught fire. I can still see it today. He called the fire department. The fire department refused to come and the shed burned down.
Because
Speaking of
black.
racial, yeah. We had an incident in front of our house. Mrs. Brent had been to visit Mrs. Strauss, and she was coming back to our house to go next door. Well, Mrs. Brent got on the side of the road and she collapsed, and she died there. So they called Fairfax Rescue Squad, but they would not pick her up because she was black. So Falls Church came and picked her up, and right there at Williams Drive and Route 50. I remember that. I can still remember there was a yellow ambulance. Came and picked her up.
So this must have been in the 50s or 60s?
That was definitely 50s.
Okay.
Yeah, Mrs. Brent. Her name was Betty Brent.
Yeah.
There were quite a few Brents around, you know. Yeah.
So needless to say, African Americans are paying taxes.
Right.
But when they need emergency services, they're not given the services they need.
Right. Now, Fairfax would come and fight the fire. Fairfax came down. Done along in Fairfax when the Woodland house burned down. When they came down and that day, but sometime when like I say, if you need medical things, it was just another story, you know.
Yeah, you better get to Freedman's.
Oh well, Freedman's. My father got sick, and you know, eventually got to be a mental case, and he ended up in back then. If this area you went, you didn't go to Staunton, Virginia. White people went to Staunton. Black folks went to Petersburg. You know, if you had a mental situation. That's the way that was, because my father died at Petersburg Hospital. Yeah. So and my aunt came all the way from Warrenton one time, stopped by the house. I must have been with her. She had an appendix attack. Went all the way to Freedom's and operated on her, and then eventually she went back to Warrenton. Yeah, so.
Because I guess the closest hospital would have been Alexandria, correct?
But Alexandria was probably segregated too, probably. A guy told me the strangest story about, in the 60s it happened to him. He had an accident on job, and He said he had to go to that Leesburg hospital. They used to have what they call a patch-up room. As you know, Dr. Harold Johnson was the only black doctor to serve people at Arlington Hospital. You know that?
No, I didn't know
Yeah, I
that.
think he was the only one. Yeah, he was the only one. So you either went to you go to Freeman's and see Dr. Johnson, but it's more or less like. Let me tell you one more thing. I think hospitals maybe had a black room or a black section. You know, they patch you up. Right in Maryfield. Let me tell you what happened. It was in It was later than the 50s. Thomas Scott had been shot by somebody. He and somebody, my neighbor, got to drinking. And who shot him? Oh, I know who shot him. Anyway, he got shot in the neck. So they took him to the hospital. The ambulance gets carried to the hospital. But the Fairfax Hospital had just been opened shortly. I heard they were very prejudiced at one time. Anyway, they took him to the hospital and they gave him a patch job. And I don't know how he got back home. Maybe he walked back. Then somebody went back in, found him again in the same position at home, took him to the hospital again. And he did a patch job. And then the third time, I think Ms. Ganson went by to check on him or something like that. And they took him to the hospital, he died. And the reason he died because being a black guy, they just gave him a bad service. Mm-hmm. He had a brother living, I don't know whether he sued the hospital or not. But I actually was working in D.C. one day, and I'm going to be talking to people. The lady told me she had worked at Fairfax Hospital. She said in the beginning they didn't want blacks and white in the same cafeteria. That's what she told me that when they first opened.
Wow.
And that's what she said. And,
yeah, because I think it opened in 1960.
60,
so
right,
that would have
right.
been before the Civil Rights Act.
I went to apply for a job, but they didn't seem to be interested. I just didn't get no satisfaction out of it. I must have been there quite a few times because I was looking for a job, but I wasn't expected to be a brain surgeon, but just wherever cleaning or whatever. But then